What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my game picks and predictions as we go into Week 11 of the 2024 college football season. Going back to my game picks and predictions from last week, my record was 6-4, so I got 6 out of the 10 games right and then 4 games wrong. So not a bad record. I've gone 6-4, throughout these predictions throughout the entire year, sometimes, some weeks, and then sometimes I'll go 50-50 at 5-5. But then I'll go 8-2 sometimes, and then my best record by far has been 9-1, and that of course happened, I believe it was a couple weeks ago in week number 9, if I'm not mistaken. And my overall record throughout this college football season at predicting 10 games is now 68-34. So we're going to give you my predictions here for week 11. Got a bunch of good games, and I don't know what it is about November, but there's always an exciting game here or there, in the month of November. We got a lot of great games again coming up this weekend, and I'm going to give you score predictions. Not that score predictions really matter. What I'm, really mattering is, picking the team who I think is going to win, and we also could see some upsets this weekend as well. So let's go ahead and get into my predictions here for week 11. I picked out 10 of the biggest games in my opinion. I'm going to give you my predictions here for all those 10 games. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll start with Miami at Georgia Tech. This one's going to be at noon Eastern time on ESPN. Miami's favored by 11, and the over and under is sitting at 63.5. So according to that over and under, we're kind of expecting a lot of points to be scored here. You look at Miami, throughout this year, of course, coming back from second half deficits, against Duke from last week, they were down 21-17 at the half, and Duke was right there with Miami until the fourth quarter, and that kind of same thing happened with Virginia Tech in the month of September for the Hurricanes. But Miami has just found ways to kind of pull away from teams. Now the Virginia Tech game, they didn't really pull away in that one back in the month of September, but they've been pulling away from a lot of these teams this year. They pulled away from Duke in the fourth quarter. Cam Ward just has made explosive plays here for this Miami team, and he just refuses to let his team lose. And Cam Ward, that's why he's probably the Heisman favorite and also the best quarterback in the country. They're coming in undefeated in this one against Georgia Tech, a pretty solid Georgia Tech team that's 5-4. This game, of course, going to be in Atlanta. I'm assuming it's going to be at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, so it's basically a neutral site game, but basically a home game here for Georgia Tech at the same time. Now, the Yellow Jackets have given Miami a lot of problems in the past. Georgia Tech, of course, beat this Miami team last year on the road in Miami, Florida. Could Georgia Tech pull off another huge upset this year? I really don't think so. Miami is a much more different team compared, to last year's team, and they're definitely a more talented team than Georgia Tech is. But I think Georgia Tech makes this close. I think this game is kind of similar to the Virginia Tech game. It is a close one, but I'm going to go with Miami here, 41-34. Like I said, a lot of points will be scored in this one, and I think Georgia Tech hangs around in this game pretty much throughout the entire game. So Miami wins this one, 41-34. Next up, we got Florida at Texas, another noon game here on ABC. Texas favored by 21.5, and the over and under sitting at 47.5. That's a very high spread there for an SEC conference game. Texas coming out of a bye week, so Texas has not played a game, in a couple more weeks. The last time we saw this Texas team was a game against Georgia. Their offense just really could not get things going against that Bulldog defense. And, the defense, I thought, had some ups and downs as well. But the offense for Texas had some turnovers in that game. You look at this team, though, for Texas, of course, we've seen a little bit of, up and down going into the rest of the year. It seemed like Texas is one of the best teams in the country. And now they're not, playing like the best team in the country. Their schedule's not all that tough, so maybe that's the reason why. But you look at Florida on the other side, this is a pretty solid 4-4 Florida team. They were right there with Georgia until the fourth quarter from last weekend. Florida doesn't have DJ Lagway anymore. They also don't have Graham Mertz. So you got two quarterbacks out with injuries. The third-string quarterback came in there for Florida and didn't really play the best, to be honest. And I think without DJ Lagway in this game, I just don't think Florida's going to make it to a bowl game now. If DJ Lagway was playing in this game, I probably would take a really closer game. But with a third-string quarterback in there, I don't really have confidence that Florida will make this a close game. And they're not going to score a ton of points here. Now, we've seen some teams have really big struggles, coming out of bye weeks. I don't think that will be the case, though, with Texas here. I don't think Texas wins by more than 20-something points, but I think they win this one still. They win this one 34-17 over Florida. So I got the Longhorns coming out of a bye week and beating Florida here 34-17. Next up, here's the big one. Georgia at Ole Miss. This one's going to be at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Georgia favored by 2.5 in this one, and the over and under sitting at 54.5. I talked about this in the upset alert video from yesterday. College game day, of course, going to be down here. It's one of the biggest games. Coming up in the weekend, there's another SEC game like Alabama and LSU as well, but this, in my opinion, is probably the game of the weekend. You got two teams that have 7 wins. Ole Miss with 2 losses, Georgia with 1 loss coming to Alabama. Ole Miss has lost to Kentucky and LSU this year. Both of these teams ranked inside the top, 25 in the playoff rankings. You look at Georgia, coming off that little bit of an up-and-down performance against Florida. I think what the difference for Georgia in that game was definitely the defense. The offense just continues to have its struggles. We saw Carson Beck in back-to-back games for Georgia throw 3 picks in a row. So, yeah, Georgia, has struggled on offense this year. This is not the same Georgia offenses that we've seen, in the early 2020s when Stetson Bennett was there. And then Carson Beck had a really good year last year as a first-time starter, but he hasn't been the best this year. So if Georgia doesn't bring their A game here against this Ole Miss team, they're probably going to get upsetted right here, and they're probably going to lose this game. This is a must-win here for Ole Miss, though. If they want to stay alive in the playoff race, they can finish out, go 10-2. But, this Ole Miss team, I don't think it will be enough. I think Georgia comes out on top in this one. It's a close game. It's a high-scoring game, but I got to go with Georgia here. I do trust Kirby Smart a little bit more than Lane Kiffin. Both of these teams used to work under Nick Saban, so both of these coaches kind of know each other a little bit well. So, yeah, Georgia wins this one. 45-42 is what I'm going to go with. I know the over and under is at 54.5, and both of these teams have really good defensive teams, but I think it's going to be a shootout, and it's definitely going to be a lot closer of a game than it was last year. But I got to go with Georgia here. I think Kirby Smart motivates his team in the fourth quarter, and I think that will be enough here for Georgia to win. 45-42 in this one. I'm going with the Bulldogs here in the game of the weekend. Next up, Michigan at Indiana, 3:30 Eastern Time as well on CBS. Indiana favored by a couple of touchdowns, also known as 14 points, and the over and under sitting at 48.5. You look at Indiana, of course, undefeated at 9-0. They've been one of the best teams on both sides of the football. They're not one of the best teams in the country, but they're not really that far behind of being the best team in the country. But this is a team that I'm saying that has been performing so well on both sides of the football. They've been doing that a lot this year. And Indiana hasn't really had a close game, probably since the Washington game. They only won by a couple of touchdowns in that game. But Indiana, we already knew that they were, going to be underrated this year, but I did not expect them to be 9-0. Now, you look at this game against Michigan. Michigan is a 5-4 team. Yeah, they've been having a disappointing year, but this is kind of the first kind of real test that Indiana will go up against like a really good defensive team. We thought, the Nebraska game would be a little bit tougher, but it turned out that game was not even close. And, Indiana might do the same thing here to Michigan, but I don't think they will do that. I think Michigan's going to compete in this game. Again, with Indiana getting all the attention from the playoff committee and also all that, media attention and everything now, maybe that does get to them, but I got to go with Indiana here. I think home field advantage might be the difference here. I don't think Indiana wins by 14. I think they only win by 4 here. I'm going with the Hoosiers, though, to win this one and stay undefeated and improve to 10-0. But, you never know. Indiana might overlook this Michigan team, and they might look ahead to the Ohio State game. We've seen that happen so many times in college football where teams overlook their opponents, and they probably just barely survive, and they don't play their best game. But I got Indiana pulling this off 24-20. Next up, we got Clemson at Virginia Tech, another 3:30 Eastern Time game on ESPN. Clemson's favored by 6.5, and the over and under sitting at 53.5. You got Clemson. How do they bounce back after a loss to Louisville from this past weekend in Death Valley at nighttime? Yeah, that's very unlikely. That happens a lot. We hardly don't really see Clemson losing at nighttime in Death Valley. But that, of course, happened. Clemson dropped off big time in the playoff rankings from a couple of nights ago. So, yeah, the committee, doesn't really give them credit for their wins. They don't really have any, great wins on their resume. And they have 2 losses, one to the number 1 or, the number 3rd ranked team in the playoff in Georgia, but they also got the loss to Louisville, which is a solid loss. But you look at this Clemson team, they're playing on the road here at Virginia Tech, a very tough place to play. Virginia Tech, an experienced team coming into the offseason. We thought they were going to be like one of those contenders to get to the ACC championship. They haven't lived up to that high, but, this is a pretty solid Virginia Tech team. They're playing at home in this one. Clemson maybe hasn't gotten over that Louisville loss, from this past weekend, and I think that's going to get to their head. I think Virginia Tech comes out fired up in this one. The crowd will be rolling, even though it's like a 3:30 game. It's not a night game and everything. If it was at night, I think Clemson would definitely have trouble, but I think Clemson still competes, but got to go with the upset here. I'm going to go with my first upset here in these predictions. I got to go with Virginia Tech, 31-27. Again, maybe Clemson hasn't gotten over that loss just yet. Next up, we got Colorado at Texas Tech. This one's going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern time on Fox. Buffalo's favored by 3.5, and the over and under sitting at 62.5. We're expecting a lot of points here to be scored in this game. You got Colorado coming out of a bye week. They're sitting there with 2 losses and 1 conference loss. Of course, the non-conference game against Nebraska was one of their losses out of the 2. So, yeah, Colorado ranked number 20th in the college football playoff rankings. This is a Colorado team that still has a chance to probably get to the Big 12 championship, but they're heading on the road here, coming out of a bye week to play Texas Tech. This is a pretty solid Texas Tech team. The Red Raiders pulled off a huge upset last week against Iowa State. So I won't actually be surprised here if Texas Tech actually pulled off the upset, and I'm going to go with that here. I think this is a close game. It's definitely a game that can really go either way. It's a high-scoring game with 2 really good offensive teams. Defensively, I would probably have to give the advantage to Texas Tech. They make a big stop here in this one. Maybe a game-winning field goal probably will be the difference, or it could be a game-winning touchdown, maybe a turnover, a fumble, or something like that can happen as well. But I got to go with the Red Raiders here. I think they pull off back-to-back upsets in back-to-back weeks. I'm going Texas Tech here, 38-35, and upsetting Colorado. Next up, we got South Carolina at Vanderbilt. This one at 4:15 Eastern time on the SEC Network. And how about this? South Carolina is favored by 3.5. Yeah, Vanderbilt's been an underdog in most of their games this year, but look at what they've done. They prove a lot of people wrong. Look at the Kentucky game. They were a big underdog in that game by double digits because, they were also a 21.5-point underdog against Alabama. Look at what they did. They won that game and pulled off one of the biggest upsets of, the year. And then, of course, they were an underdog against Auburn last week, and look at what they done. They beat Auburn on the road 17-7. So Vanderbilt's kind of, one of the best underdogs in the country. You look at South Carolina, though, they were a 2.5-point underdog against Texas A&M. These are 2 teams that have been underdogs in most of their games all year long. So it's going to come down to who is the best underdog in the SEC, in my opinion. But I tell you what, I've been liking how Vanderbilt's been playing this year, and also Diego Pavia is probably one of the best running quarterbacks in the SEC, in my opinion. So I do trust this Vanderbilt running game a little bit more. I think it's a low-scoring defensive battle, but, maybe offenses start to pick up in the second half. But I got to go with Vanderbilt here in this one. Again, Vanderbilt proves everyone wrong when they are a big underdog, and they'll be an underdog here in this game again. Vanderbilt wins this one 28-24. I'm going with the Commodores. Next up, we got the big one here in the SEC, another big SEC matchup, Alabama at LSU, 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Alabama favored by a field goal, also known as 3 points, and the over and under is sitting there at 58.5. You got 2 of these teams ranked in the top 15 in the playoff rankings, 2 6-2 teams as well coming out of bye weeks. Alabama, they haven't been like the Alabama team that we've seen, of course, in the Nick Saban era in the past, but Alabama beat Missouri pretty easily a couple weeks ago. They didn't have Brady Cook in that game, but Alabama's defense looked a lot more better, compared to all the other games that they've played this year. And they've had some tough losses. A Vanderbilt game was really a solid loss for them, and then they had that good loss to Tennessee, a game they had so many opportunities to win that game. And then you look at LSU, a couple of losses for them as well. USC is a really bad loss for them, but they also got that loss to Texas A&M. So both of these teams are pretty similar. They've had some tough losses, and they've had some tough offensive performances as well. But this is a rivalry game. It's always a pretty good one here between the Tide and the Tigers. But, this is a tough one to call. It's at night in Death Valley. You can't win at Death Valley at night at LSU. I mean, it's just really impossible. We've seen that, of course, in the 2020s year. But, back in the old days, Alabama used to win this game, on the road. They would struggle, but they would somehow find a way to win this one. But got to go with LSU here in this one. I think it's a close game. It's a game that probably comes down to a turnover, maybe a game changer, probably perhaps is a turnover, and maybe a game-winning field goal. or it could be one of those games where Brian Kelly probably goes for, a fourth down, or maybe like it's one of those game-winning touchdowns where he just goes for it instead of, taking the game-winning field goal, or, taking the field goal to win it. He probably gets the, win here. So got to go with LSU here because they're playing at home 31-28. It's another one of those classic Alabama and LSU matchups. Next up in the SEC, we got Oklahoma and Missouri. This one's going to be at 7:45 Eastern Time on the SEC Network. Oklahoma favored in this one. How about this? 2.5-point favorites for Oklahoma, and the over and under sitting at 41.5. How about that? Oklahoma 5-4, heading on the road to play a ranked Missouri team. That doesn't make any sense. Oklahoma is 5-4, and Missouri has, the playoff ranking number at number 24, and they're also 6-2. I think the reason why Oklahoma is favored in this one is because Missouri doesn't really probably have Brady Cook here in this game. That's going to be the question mark, is the question mark for the offensive side of the football for Missouri. But again, Oklahoma doesn't have a great offensive team either, so that's going to be the question mark here for both of these teams. It's going to probably come down to who has the better offense. The defenses, I think, are pretty even though Oklahoma has the advantage there. I think this is a low-scoring type game, but I got to go with Missouri here just because of the home field advantage. I kind of had a tough time predicting this one, but I got to go with the Tigers here in Missouri. They win this one 20-13 in a low-scoring defensive battle. And again, that spread really shocks me. Oklahoma favored by 2.5 as a 5-4 team. And then finally in the Big 12, we got BYU at Utah, a rivalry game here at 10:15 Eastern Time on ESPN. BYU is favored by 4. This is BYU's first game in the month of November. They're coming out of a bye week. How about BYU, though, ranked number 9 in the playoff rankings? I don't really think they're getting all the respect from the committee here. They haven't really played anybody that tough probably since, Kansas State and SMU, to be honest. But they have a great resume. They're undefeated. They're at least still in the top 10, but I was kind of expecting them to be higher than that, but they are the front runners in the Big 12. They're taking on a Utah team that's 4-4. Utah only has one conference win and everything. Utah, though, I think is going to come out fired up because this is a rivalry game. Anything can probably go in this game, and it's obviously going to be a rivalry that's played every year now because you got the Big 12 here for both of these teams, but BYU, it seems like they get off to slow starts sometimes. Like I said, we've seen some teams struggle and, coming out of bye weeks and everything. I think BYU is one of those teams that comes into this game kind of struggles, but I got to go with the Cougars here. Again, Utah just has been a kind of a disappointing it's been a disappointing year for this Utah team, but if they get a big win here, this is definitely going to make the Big 12 a lot more wide open and a lot more chaotic, and the playoff rankings are definitely going to take a huge hit here for BYU, but got to go with BYU in this one. I think they still remain undefeated. It's a close game, though. I don't think BYU pulls away. It's probably those low-scoring defensive battles, but I got to go with BYU. 21-17, they beat their rival Utah here on this one on Saturday at 10:15 Eastern Time on ESPN. So those are my official game picks and predictions heading into Week 11 of this 2024 college football season. Let me guys know what you think about my game picks and predictions, and give me your picks and predictions on these 10 games down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.